get us started, I know that there will be some people rolling on to the call today, but my name is Ann Mavity, and I am the Executive Director of the Minnesota Housing Partnership, and I want to welcome you all to this webinar today. It's a really exciting moment that has taken years in the making to get to this point today to talk about the Minnesota Housing Tax Credit. And really today we'll be laying out with a bunch of experts on this, sort of what the opportunity available is for all of you in your communities to use this new resource to create more housing in Minnesota. So thank you so much for joining us. Most of you know already that Minnesota Housing Partnership is a statewide advocacy and research organization. We also work nationwide with rural communities and native communities to create more housing and help folks build capacity to solve their own housing challenges. And we, of course, help drive state level investments and work in partnership with legislative leaders and all of you to make that happen. So I'll just note that today is the due date for the Super RFP applications, and for all of you that have applications. Well, I'm guessing that anyone whose application is not yet in is not on this call, but thank you for all of you for the work that you're doing to create more housing. And I think it's notable that without legislative action this year, that fewer of these projects and less housing will be created as a result. And this kind of new resource that has been created through the Affordable Housing Tax Credit is absolutely essential, and even more essential now than it's been in the past. So of course, the tax credit program, it's something that MHP has worked on for years, helped design and build a coalition around, and helped lobby with many of your assistance. It is funded at $10 million annually. And right now, it is the largest new source of revenue that the state has created in more than a decade. So we are hoping with this resource, we could rehab 680 homes, or maybe deepen affordability for 400 homes, or build new homes, 200 or more new homes through this resource. So we know that there are opportunities, and it only works when all of you are working with us to deploy these resources. So with that, we have an exciting agenda today, and I'm going to turn this over to MHP's Policy Director, Libby Murphy, to get us started with our panelists today. Libby?
Thank you, Ann. So we're just going to jump right in. Like Ann said, we're really excited to have you all here. So we are going to hear next from Senator Nelson, who was the bill's chief author for 4 years. I just wanted to start by saying, I remember being in Senator Nelson's office to talk about kind of broad housing topics, and she was on the Capital Investment Committee at the time. And she noticed a bill in my bag and asked about it. And I explained what we were calling the Tax Credit Contribution Fund at the time. And she started lobbying me to chief author the bill. It aligned with her passions, and she felt that she could be the senator to deliver in getting the program enacted and funded. And she was right. And so that established just a great relationship with Senator Nelson, who we worked with closely for 4 years on passing the bill. And I just want to say that rarely do I have an opportunity to work with a lawmaker who is so passionate in how they advocate for a program. At every housing related engagement she participated in, whether or not it was a Minnesota Housing Partnership event or Homes for All event, or a coalition event in Rochester area where she's from, she pitched the tax credit, and she collaborated with MHP to develop strategies and implement tactics to advance the bill. And she's still committed to the work. She's been meeting with the Department of Revenue and Minnesota Housing on a number of occasions to make sure that this legislation is going to turn into an impactful program. So I want to thank Senator Nelson for her work, her commitment, and her enthusiasm. I'm going to turn it over to her. Let me.
Well, thank you, Libby. It is a joy. It is actually a joy to be with you all here today, and really to be celebrating this milestone. And the title slide that you had with my name on there, and I just want you to know that many of you, I'm sure, knew Joe Weiss, who was sitting at that testifying table on the far end there. And unfortunately, we lost Joe a few months ago, but anyone in affordable housing knew Joe Weiss. And I'm hoping he knows about this today, this, which was so important to him and so important to many of us and Minnesotans, is actually now law. So what I thought I'd do is, if you want to advance the slide, I'll just go through a couple of the things which probably you already know. And so I won't be very long on this, but obviously Minnesota Housing Partnership, you all know this better than anyone. Why did we need this? Well, obviously the private market wasn't working. And I dug up this second bullet point from some of my notes from the housing tax credit, that bill that I wrote in 2019 or authored in 2019. And at that point, and you probably have some updated numbers, there were 300,000 homes needed by 2030 to meet the demand and keep our state strong. And so you might have even more numbers. I hope we've made progress, but with 2 years of a pandemic, it's hard to know. And also with staggering inflation that people are seeing. And as you know, cities, employers are all concerned about the lack of affordable and workforce housing across Minnesota. Particularly now, we have a workforce housing crisis. We have a workforce shortage, and certainly the housing must be there in order to fulfill those workforce needs. And that means that all of us obviously have a role to play. You can advance to the next slide. Minnesota Housing Partnership, you're experts at this type of collaboration. So as we called it in the tax bill, the AHTC, we always seem to have abbreviations and acronyms. The Affordable Housing Tax Credit, as you know, simple, effective, proven way, and it boosts investment in affordable and workforce housing. It's an innovative tool. And the reason, and I remember that conversation too, Libby, in my office, the reason that my ears perked up is that I was well aware that we had a significant housing shortage. And as a former teacher, I know what everybody knows is if kids don't have a safe and secure, predictable place to lay their head every night, there is just no way that they're able to concentrate on their learning, which of course directly ties to their future and ours. And so when Libby talked about the Affordable Housing Tax Credit in the North Dakota model, the piece that really rang out to me was that it incentivizes private investment to promote economic development. And that's key, because the problem is too big for just government or too big for just nonprofits. We needed to activate the private investment. And that's what this bill does. Neighbors, employers are encouraged, are incentivized to invest in their community and create housing opportunities. I believe, you know, that rolled out, this will spur the development of affordable and workforce housing for Minnesotans of low and moderate incomes. It will help solve the workforce crisis. It will provide homes for Minnesota kids. It will empower Minnesotans. So if you can, next slide, please. Well, there's many hands along the journey. This is just, I'll list a few of those there that I went back in my records and saw. So in 2018, Representative Sarah Anderson authored this bill in the House. And of course, I was the Senate author. Then in 2019, Representative Tabke offered the bill in the House, and I was a Senate author. I remember we had a great press conference. And then in 2021, Representative Howard offered in the House, and of course I offered in the Senate. But then, well, it was COVID. And of course we didn't get it done at the end of session, but we did in the first special session. And so as tax chair, Marquardt offered that in the House. And of course I was tax chair by then in the Senate. And of course, then I authored that in the Senate. I also noticed in looking back on my notes that Chair Marquardt had actually also been one of the co-sponsors back in 2018 of the Sarah Anderson bill. So it was finally signed into law. Next slide, please. one more. There we go. And so I'll just give you the high level pieces. And I know you might already know these, but obviously the 2021 law established the Minnesota Housing Tax Credit Contribution Account. So it established the housing tax credit in the contribution account, and it's in the Housing Development Fund in the state treasury, and it's administered by the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency. And it provides loans or grants for low and moderate income housing construction. And as I noted, it's modeled after the highly successful North Dakota model. And it is that tax credit contribution fund that is capitalized by contributions from taxpayers who have state tax liabilities. So that's kind of the key thing. Contributions, not mandatory, contributions from taxpayers who have Minnesota tax liability. Next slide, please. And as was noted, I did not know it at the time, but it is the largest new and ongoing investment for affordable housing development and preservation since 2013. As was noted, 10 million annually. You do need to know that out of that, we had to fund, that would be 100,000 per year to the Minnesota Housing Finance for Administration. The housing tax credits are available beginning tax year 23, which yes, we are in now, and ending in June 30th of 2028. It's a 6-year program. Participation in the program, it's simple. The program provides a proven innovative tool to leverage substantial private equity in a way that's flexible and easy to use across the state. Next slide. We believe it's simple because it's its own standalone program. It's not one of those consolidated RFPs that you all got in today. This is a standalone program to give greater resources, and also the understanding and the experience is that it will be more simple and easier to participate in and to administer. So the housing tax credit and the contribution account. Key number here, 85%. It's an 85% non-refundable tax credit that contributing taxpayers can use against their state tax liability. And in exchange for that contribution, which goes to the Minnesota Housing Tax Credit Contribution Account that was formed, those eligible taxpayers will receive that tax credit certification. And eligible taxpayers include individuals and the corporations under 290.01 subdivision 6 or section 2971.01 subdivision 16. You will note that while it's non-refundable, there is a 10-year carryover allowed. And those eligible contributions, originally, bills get modified as they move through committees and we learn more. Originally, my goal was that everybody would be able to participate in being part of the solution to the housing needs in their community. And my thought was contributing at least $100. But we found that would have been very labor intensive on the administrative side for that. So we did change the legislation. This is one of the changes, obviously. So contributions must be at least $1,000, but not more than $2 million. And the taxpayer who chooses to participate then also chooses if he or she wants to contribute to a qualified specific affordable housing project, perhaps one in their area, or if they want to contribute to the general loan pool. So they make that decision how they want their contribution to finance housing, a specific qualified project or general loan pool. Note there's just a couple other little caveats. Non-residents, part-year residents, that's allocated based on the percentage under section 290.06 subdivision 2C paragraph E. And then it can also be passed through pro rata to partnerships and multiple owners. And as I mentioned, in exchange for that contribution to the Minnesota Housing Tax Credit contribution account, the taxpayer will receive a certificate within 30 days of that contribution. And that credit is for the year in which the contribution was made. Next slide, please. Now, there are some set-asides. And again, this is part of the flexibility in this program. So for the use of those account funds, at least 10% of the housing tax credit contribution account funds must be used for towns and small cities outside the metropolitan area. And that would be the 7-county metro area as defined under the Met Council control. And then at least 35% of the contribution account funds must be used for housing for persons and families with incomes 50% or less of the area median income. And then at least 25% must be used for single family housing. I believe that's important because I still believe that home ownership is the best way to gain generational wealth. And so I wanted to make sure that was there. And much as I did, I was also years ago when I was a freshman in the Senate, wrote the angel investor tax credit. And similarly, we had set-asides, but what we found that we later amended, and it's in this new legislation as well, that September 1 is the date that those set-aside categories evaporate. So we don't want money just sitting unused. So if the categories are not met by September 1, then the money is available for any, not necessarily just those set-asides. Next slide, please. And then one of the pieces that caused really some of the greatest discussion, and rightfully so, because it's a pretty hefty credit, at 85% credit, was there had to we had to make sure that there was no self-dealing. And so there was a great discussion about, well, who would not be qualified, who could not participate in the this affordable housing tax credit. And basically, if an individual or business has already contributed to the account in the current or prior tax year and received a credit certificate, they could not participate again. We want to make sure that it's not just one entity or one individual that could possibly use up a majority of those tax credits. Secondly, an individual or business would not be eligible if they owned the housing and used it as their domicile. So, and own and use as domicile. Or they would not be eligible if the person is the officer or principal of a business entity, or the business entity made that contribution in the current or previous tax year and received a credit for it. So that's the similar piece. Also, one would not be eligible if they own, control, or hold power to vote at least 20% of outstanding securities of a business entity, and the entity made the contribution in the previous year and received a tax credit. So just a little clarity on how we crafted this so to eliminate no self-dealing. And so there were certain entities that would not qualify. Next slide, please. And as you saw, this has been an amazing, this is one of these bills that I just feel so good about because, well, one, it's going to do good things, but you know what? It was more than all hands on deck. This was the list of supporters. Nobody does this like Minnesota Housing Partnership, being able to align so many supporters. And it was probably even more. I think this might have been the 2019 bill. And kudos to Libby for hanging with me. And I think, I just had to become tax chair in order to get this done. And am pleased to be the tax chair and very thankful for all the good work that the Minnesota Housing Partnership, Libby in particular. I think we worked together through maybe a couple babies. And the bottom line is, I think the bill kept getting better. And as Ann mentioned, probably even greater need now than when we started. So thank you so much. Really, I tip my hat to the Minnesota Housing Partnership. And I hope to be kept abreast of the importance that this bill is making. And I would note, as I said, it's a 6-year program. So it is really incumbent on us to show outstanding, unquestionable, great results so that this will be continued going forward. When I was education chair, I had some great things that were going forward, but a new education chair came along and I noticed, oh, those things aren't there anymore. So I think it's very important that we show great results, and I'm sure we will. So thank you so very much.
Thank you, Senator Nelson, so much. That was a very thorough overview. And so we are going to move on with the webinar. If you have questions that are specific to Senator Nelson, if you could please put them in the chat. If MHP staff can't answer the question, we can submit those to Senator Nelson and her staff, and she can answer those. And I know that Senator Nelson will continue to be a partner in developing the program and making sure that it is impactful and it gets out the door and it's fully capitalized. So thank you so much, Senator Nelson. Next, we are going to hear from Jennifer Henderson, who is the Planning and Housing Development Director at the North Dakota Housing Finance Agency. As the Affordable Housing Tax Credit was modeled after North Dakota's Housing Incentive Fund, we wanted to bring folks with that experience to share some of their insights and to provide an overview of how the program worked, and especially those insights as we think about how to design a program here in Minnesota. What lessons can we learn? What was successful over there? What might be different to create an even more successful program here in the state of Minnesota? So Jennifer, welcome, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Libby. Thanks for having me here today. It's really a very exciting time for all of you in Minnesota, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the successes of this program as it evolves in your state. Kudos to the legislators for realizing the need of this program, and I wish you all great success. But I'm here today to really provide some background information, like Libby said, on our North Dakota Housing Incentive Fund and how it has evolved, or the strategies that were used and some lessons learned throughout our tenure of the program. So the program has been around for quite a while already. It was created in 2011. So we are in our 11th year of the program. It was created in part in response to a housing crisis that evolved very quickly with oil impacted Western communities. These cities were unable to find housing for police, teachers, and medical workers. And so the fund was developed to really prioritize the construction of affordable rental units to support housing for what we termed as essential service workers. And that term is defined as employed by the city, county, state, school districts, and medical facilities. So units targeted to employees of those industries were prioritized with the fund. The initial legislative authority allowed our agency to accept tax credit contributions, and it limited the dollar amount each biennium, $15 million in the first biennium, $20 million in the second, and $30 million in the third biennium. The funds could not be distributed until the fund was fully capitalized. So a lot of work had to go into marketing the fund and really getting that capitalization to happen. So our agency put together a communication strategy, and first really dedicating a HIF microsite so that it was easy for the public to find information about the fund. And at Libby, I will put in the chat after I'm done talking a link to that microsite. So the microsite still exists today. It looks a little different than it originally did because our program has evolved. But that said, it's a really important landing point for both our stakeholders, partners, and those who are interested in communicating or contributing to the fund. Our communications department developed 2 documents that were targeted for contributors, and that included a frequently asked questions and a what contributors needed to know. And those documents were really simple 1-page documents to briefly explain how contributing to the fund worked. It was really important to provide a very consistent message and a centralized place to find information about the credits. So we really used that microsite as our main marketing area. So media coverage was primarily our means of promoting the fund. Any major contribution was publicized with a big check presentation ceremony in the community where the project was being developed to really spur interest from other contributors who were interested in having that community support publicity. It's really important to allow those large contributors to be publicized for their community support and include them in any invites or open houses. I think that type of promotional outreach for contributors allows them to, one, compete against each other for being top contributors to a project, but also to really let them show their commitment to the community. Our microsite also contained, at the time, a contribution campaign thermometer to show the continued progress of that campaign. We also, just like Minnesota is going to allow, taxpayers are able to choose the project to support so they can directly communicate or contribute to the growth of their community. And that really was a selling point for contributions. So that allowance to participate in how and direct their taxpayer spending was a really good selling point for our contributors. Some outreach and education. So in addition to just trying to get contributors to buy into the program and understand what it was about, we also had to spend some time visiting with tax accounting firms and tax practitioners. How were the credits claimed? How does that paperwork work? We presented quite a bit at accounting conferences to educate CPAs and so that they could help educate their clients. I will tell you that CPAs were not interested in selling the contribution to their clients, just really interested in how it worked. We also spent quite a bit of time outreaching to bankers associations and to really open those discussions about how the contribution to the tax credit would qualify as a CRA investment incentive. So that is an important sales point for our financial institutions. In addition to just that general outreach and education, we also did require any applications to come forward with some support. So our funding is allocated on a competitive scoring application round. The points that we were able to provide to applicants who demonstrated ability to raise capital through those private contributions. So priority was given to proposals that had letters of interest or commitments from contributors to the fund. I do want to point out that commitments or letters of interest are somewhat all we were able to obtain during the beginning of the year. Our large contributors did not want to make a contribution until as close to the end of the tax year as possible. So it's super important to provide that opportunity to have a commitment to the funds rather than requiring that contribution to be made too early in the year. Libby, do we have a slide of the contributor composition? I just want to show how that evolved over time. I can't really see the screen. There it is. Thank you, Libby. So this here is a view of our Housing Incentive Fund contributions. So as I mentioned, each biennium we had an opportunity to collect tax contributions. The first biennium, the breakdown of contributors was really even between corporate, financial, and individual contributors. The next biennium, you'll see that nearly 60% of the fund was financed by financial institution contributions. And then corporate and individuals were about even. And then finally, the last biennium that we collected tax credit contributions, again, the financial institutions were our major contributors, and then corporations came in second. And so the amount of individuals really declined during that time frame. So as I mentioned before, HIF really has evolved over time, over these 11 years. It was created to essentially prioritize those essential service worker units, but it did quickly evolve to fill two essential needs. The first one is to really be that gap financing for our projects that are financed with other federal programs, including the low-income housing tax credit. And two, it's nearly the only source of financing available for small, rural, affordable projects. So as many of you on the phone here are likely are aware, federal financing sources such as tax credit and trust fund are very complex, and they're mainly used for projects of a certain size. In North Dakota, the primary use of our tax credit program is in our 5 urban communities, leaving a number of communities that are unable to compete for that source. So today, the Housing Incentive Fund, it really prioritizes the use to rural communities, and then secondly, to fill the gaps for our low-income housing tax credit program. So HIF has really become an important resource for our local rural communities to continue to rehab or create additional affordable rental sources. I will say that the fund has also evolved to no longer rely on tax credit contributions. So the last 2 sessions that HIF has been funded, it's solely been funded through our general fund appropriation. I will say that today, we're unsure. A majority of the corporations who contributed to the fund were oil industry communities and companies. And so their, ability to continue to participate on the level that they had in the past is quite in flux given the oil industry's current situation. So it's really unknown how corporations would continue to participate. I know we still had interest from our financial institutions to continue their participation. And then again, still allowing individuals to choose how their taxpayer dollars are being spent is an important selling point. So some recommendations that I have is one, identify those potential community contributors early. Who are the local employers who may have employee housing needs that'll benefit from the housing that's being designed? Talking with your local community banks about their CRA interests will be very important. And then knowing that contributors may not want to contribute until closer to the end of the tax year. So planning for that is going to be really helpful. One thing that we did not have capability is allowing an online contribution. That I think would be something beneficial if it was an option for you. HIF contributions, they could only come in via mail, and then each contribution campaign that we offered was fully capitalized by the end of the first year. So if there was any last minute contributions that came in over the cap, or they had to be returned. And so that became a little confusing and a little bit of an administrative burden to make sure that we were returning funds to individuals. Also, I would recommend that the tax department ensures that they have staff that are aware and assigned to answer questions regarding tax return filing with the contributions. That was something that became really important, was our relationship with the tax department, who was going to administer that side of the tax credits. So with that, I don't know, Libby, will you be introducing my partner from North Dakota here as well, who can kind of go into more depth of how they utilize Housing Incentive Fund and contributions?
Yes, I will introduce Dan. And Jennifer, the last 2 questions are really in the chat, I think are directed at you. If you're able to answer those in the chat, that would be fantastic.
Sure.
But next I am going to, introduce Dan Madler, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Beyond Shelter, which has been awarded multiple Housing Incentive Fund awards. So he's here with us today to share his experience using a contribution style credit to finance different types of projects. So Dan, I will turn it over to you. And if you could just let me know when to move the slides, that would be great.
Absolutely. And thank you, Libby. And hopefully everybody can hear me okay. And I appreciate the opportunity to provide and share some of the information and experiences that Beyond Shelter had in utilizing the powerful tool that was created in North Dakota. You know, I was asked here today to essentially present some information and to talk about Beyond Shelter's experience in utilizing the North Dakota program, the Housing Incentive Fund, which I have found had, because it was modeled, the Minnesota program was modeled after North Dakota. A lot of the comments that I have are kind of universal and will carry over and should apply as you take your journey into this new program. You know, I'll touch on some of our experience related to soliciting contributions, you know, what worked and what didn't work, and basically who actually contributed to Beyond Shelter's projects. I'll also touch on and provide two brief examples of two projects that we worked on that did not utilize the low-income housing tax credit program, how that financing stack looked, and basically provide a few recommendations. And I think you'll kind of hear a familiar theme from what Senator Nelson talked about and Jennifer talked about regarding the recommendations. And so with that, I'll just go ahead and get started. Libby, if you want to go ahead and advance the screen for the next slide. Okay, so.
And Dan, if it's possible to get closer to your microphone, I think that would be a little helpful.
I'll give it a try, and I'll try talking louder as well.
Thank you.
So the information on this screen here has a lot of information, and so I'm going to try to connect the dots. Essentially, Beyond Shelter was pretty aggressive in pursuing the housing incentive funds, because we had a lot of projects that basically needed some gap financing and or did not quite fit the traditional tax credit project model that we typically develop. And so on the screen, you'll see examples of a point in time tracking spreadsheet that we used. And the point in time here is December of 2013. Essentially, Beyond Shelter has 7 projects that utilized and was successful in receiving a housing incentive fund award of approximately $8.4 million. And at this time in 2013, this is when the way the program was set up, the developer was responsible for soliciting and raising funds. And the way it worked out in North Dakota is, for the total HIF dollar amount award of the $8.4 million, we had to come up with and raise to move a project forward approximately $4.8 million, or 57% of the funds needed to support the project. And so basically, we went through and worked with several agencies and partners, and you can kind of see that we were able to raise approximately $3 million at this point in time from several entities, and most of them were financial institutions in our part. And going back to Jennifer's slide, they had about, I'd say 56% were from financial institutions. Our success came from the financial institutions. Ours was a little bit 77%. And that was more relationship driven, which I'll touch on here later on. But you can kind of see that basically there's a lot going on, who we solicited the funds from. And I guess a recommendation that I would have off of this experience is, and it kind of ties back to Senator Nelson's comment of, they designed the program in the statute to be flexible. And I would recommend that you carry that over into the qualified in the allocation plan that's to be developed. North Dakota Housing Finance Agency, Jennifer and her team, they did a great job of allowing flexibility within the program. And a great example of that flexibility is the reallocation that's highlighted in yellow. We received commitments that were above and beyond what we needed for our HIF contribution. and that they allowed the flexibility of our contributors, if they agreed to essentially transfer their contribution from the identified project that they had to another Beyond Shelter project. And so on this slide, basically you can see $156,000 was transferred from basically the North Sky 2 project and the Cooks Court project to a Minot project called Fieldcrest. And so flexibility was definitely appreciated. And so I guess I would say, don't tie your hands, allow for flexibility. Some additional things, not reflected on here is at this point in time, we still needed $1.7 million to move 2 projects forward. And we did receive another contribution from a financial institution, Wells Fargo, for $1 million. And then I believe the balance of the $789,000 came from general fund or general pool funds. And so that's kind of how we were able to fully fund our requirement and kind of move forward. But before I guess I talk about what worked in soliciting these funds and what didn't work, I guess I would just say that, it is and it will be a process for everyone. Be prepared to tell stories. And some of the stories that we told were similar to what you've heard is when you're talking with your contributors or potential contributors, whether they're corporations or businesses or individuals, the great story that you can tell is if you commit to our project and you contribute to this fund, it allows you to basically essentially bring your tax dollars back to the community that you currently live in, have a business in, and are served. And so, there's not a lot of programs that allow a taxpayer to kind of direct where your tax dollars go. Most of the time, they just go into a general fund and the legislators get to allocate according to whatever they want to do. But here's an opportunity to basically have an impact in your local community and direct, in Minnesota's case, 85% or 85 cents on the dollar of your contribution back to your own community. So we emphasize that piece of the program. And we also basically, when it came to financial institutions, they had the double dip. Not only could they reinvest their dollars back into the communities that they serve or do business in, but they also potentially qualified for CRA, Community Reinvestment Act credits. And so that also was a great story or something to emphasize along the way when you're talking to some of your contributors or potential contributors. The other story you want to talk about is how the project is basically the who, what, why, when, where, and how the project's going to benefit your community and basically be an asset to your community. And then the last thing I would say would be follow up. You need to follow up, provide additional information. We definitely followed up with our potential contributors, our partners, our stakeholders. We utilize the programs and the marketing materials and the information that North Dakota Housing Finance Agency put together, referenced it, and folded that into our presentation and our ask. And it all worked together. And so, like I said, it's a process, but it's repeatable. What worked? Relationships matter. And going back to over 77% of our contributions came from financial institutions. That's basically, we work with financial institutions in everything we do, from construction financing to permanent financing to equity. And so we leveraged up our relationship with our stakeholders, and that worked out very well. And like Jennifer said, reach out to them early in the process. When you have that project conception and you're moving a project forward, start reaching out to potential contributors and your stakeholders and your partners and start educating them about this program and the need and the benefits. What didn't work was that cold call. If you did not have a relationship or somebody that could refer you over, it was very hard to solicit and get individual or contributions for our project. And so I would say, put your time and energy in leveraging up your relationships. With that, I guess, Libby, we can go to the next slide. What you'll see, I think, in the next probably 3 slides is when we were meeting with essentially potential contributors or partners or stakeholders, you want to be able to tell your story. And so we essentially put together a 1-pager that talked about the project story, what it is, what it did, how it was going to basically benefit the program. And so we provided the next couple of slides are just an example of what we left with our meetings, our stakeholders, so that they had something that they could go to. And preliminary upfront visual, we provided elevations of the project. You know, if you can provide visuals of what the project will look like, how it's going to be sited, maybe an overview or aerial view of the location so people can kind of tie and place it to the community, that's great. And definitely want to follow up here at this time. You know, we had secured $551,000 for this project, and we still needed to raise $765,700. And so basically allowed you to basically show what you're still looking for and talk about how, you know, their contribution can play a key role in moving this project forward. You can go ahead and advance, Libby, to the next slide. Okay, so this is one of the projects that we did that was basically did not utilize the low-income housing tax credits. It's Fieldcrest Apartments located in a community of Minot, North Dakota, 42 units. You can kind of see the rent breakdown, etc. We utilized approximately $2.3 million in housing incentive funds to get this project to move forward. Next slide. And how we did this and what you know, how do we put together the sources, the capital stack to make this work? And in Minot, I would say the way it worked and why it worked for this project is the community of Minot in 2011 had a historic flood. And with that flood came some disaster recovery funds in the form of CDBG dollars. And here on this slide, you can see, you know, 55% of the funds that came into this project were disaster recovery funds or federal funds. Then we layered in the housing incentive fund, which made up of 28%. We took out a traditional permanent bank loan for another 10%. And then how we had to fill the gap, it basically was our developer fee. The project developer fee earned was about $744,000. And as you can see, we basically essentially deferred approximately 70% of that fee back into the project, and just to make the numbers work. To date, the project has been successful. Occupancy has been great. It's been, you know, basically cash flowing to help pay for some of that deferred fee. But that's how we were able to utilize a project without bringing in the horsepower of the tax credit project. Next slide. Here's another example of North Sky Apartments. It's 24 units in the community of Fargo. It's an affordable senior project. And the capital stack here, similar, you know, to the Fieldcrest apartment, we needed to leverage up some of the federal resources. And so 16% of the funds were federal resources in the form of NSP and or home funds. A big significant impact or contribution was the housing incentive fund, $1.4 million. But in this project, to make it work, we had to defer 100% of our developer fee and put some of our own cash in the deal. This was a much needed project in the community of Fargo. Senior housing was strong need, strong demand. And this is where we took advantage of some of the profits we had generated from prior deals and reinvested into our mission. And we reinvested about $120,000 to make that work. So those are 2 examples briefly for everybody to kind of maybe consider, toss around. And I guess going back to some recommendations, the last things I have is like Senator Nelson said, is be flexible, build in flexibility, which allows you to react to unknowns, i.e. in our example would be the reallocation of some of the donations. And then as this plan is being developed and input and is being provided, I would just urge that you basically layer in, you fight the urge to layer in additional restrictions. Basically keep it simple and nimble. Most of the other sources of funds that you'll probably have will have restrictions that either meet or exceed what's currently required in the Minnesota program. So like I said, keep it simple and nimble. With that, I guess I'll conclude my presentation, and thank everybody for your time, and best of luck to everybody as you pursue this new venture.
Thank you so much, Dan. We will not have time for questions. So again, if you have questions for Dan, please put them in the chat, and hopefully Dan will be able to answer those now. If not, we can send them to Dan and send those out, the answers out as part of the follow-up. So Senator Nelson covered most of what I was going to talk about, so that's good. So my comments will now highlight some additional things that I want to make sure are big takeaways, as well as next steps and what MHP is doing to ensure that Minnesota Housing designs a program that is going to be impactful and successful. In addition to kind of what you can expect in terms of materials and potential future webinars from MHP. So I think you now have a solid overview of the program, and my slides as well as the notes will be available as follow-up. But I wanted to highlight so that because it's 9.9 million in tax credits that will be available, and it's an 85-cent credit for every dollar contributed, that will equate to a little more than 11.6 million in loans and grants that will become available to projects. So as you are developers and communities thinking about this program, think about that 11.6 million in new funds, resources that will be made available, assuming the program is fully capitalized. Let's see. Just want to again highlight the benefits as MHP lobbied the program and as we developed the program. The Affordable Housing Tax Credit provides loans and grants to projects that garner the financial support of the community. So it is a way for businesses and individuals to say yes to development in their communities, to demonstrate support and be out front in their support of affordable and workforce housing development in this community. So in this regard, the community can help drive housing development that fits a community's unique needs. It does incentivize private-public partnerships without requiring contributors to become investors. So in this way, it should be simpler and easier for mid-sized, smaller banks as financial institutions to participate. We heard from large banks that it's a way for them to participate in communities where they don't typically act as investors of low-income housing tax credit projects, but where they want to receive CRA credits because they don't want to invest, be an investor in some of the smaller rural projects. It also facilitates partnerships with businesses and financial institutions that are not currently involved. And we hope that it will support development that is less competitive in the consolidated RFP, because it's going to be a program outside of the consolidated RFP. And so it will have unique criteria. We also have heard and think that it will be a way for nonprofit developers and organizations to incentivize current donors to donate more. So you may have a donor who has been stuck at $500 a year. Well, they might be able to reach that minimum donation for the credit and then receive the credit. Or you might have a donor who's been donating significantly more than that. Again, they might be willing to donate more because of the credit that they will now receive. Other positive benefits is there's no syndicators, and so that which again should make the process of contributing to affordable housing development significantly easier than other tax credit models. Let's see. Senator Nelson went over the eligible uses and the set-asides and the awardees. I just want to highlight again how it can work for projects and what we anticipate We anticipate developers and communities applying for a loan or grant and applying with or without pre-committed donations. It is to be determined, and some of the recommendations that we're hoping to make is how will Minnesota Housing treat projects that have those pre-committed donations versus projects that aren't coming without those pre-committed donations. So then Minnesota Housing will award projects. They will receive a conditional approval of a loan or grant. And then with that, developers will be tasked with going out and securing donations in the sum of the approved loan or grant. This was touched upon, but I want to highlight that if a project cannot secure enough in donations, Minnesota Housing can allocate funds from the general contribution account to a project. If a project secures excess donations in excess of the approved loan or grant will go into the general contribution account. The contributor can still receive a certificate indicating where they intended their contribution to go, and that will be really important for banks. There's many ways for contributors to participate. Again, to contribute to a specific project, one that has been awarded by Minnesota Housing, one that is applying and wants pre-committed donations to help prioritize the project in the award process, and then also to the general contribution account. And receiving the certificate should be relatively easy, and submitting that with their taxes is intended to be very easy. Jennifer kind of highlighted potential contributors, but we are anticipating a wide variety of contributors, and it will really depend on the development community and the relationships that you have established and that you are willing to go out and establish as you work on development in the community. So we do have many unknowns, as we don't have guidance and guidelines for criteria from the Department of Revenue or Minnesota Housing. And I've identified some key questions, including we don't have an idea of the projected timeline to see a draft program from Minnesota Housing, or when we anticipate public engagement and a comment period from Minnesota Housing, as well as the release of a final program criteria. We don't have any sense of what Minnesota Housing will prioritize among all applications and within each set aside. When Minnesota Housing will begin accepting donations to the general contribution account, and the date Minnesota Housing will begin accepting applications, and will it be deadline driven, or will it be rolling? So because there are so many unknowns, Minnesota Housing Partnership is investing a lot of effort into soliciting feedback from partners. So that may, if you are interested in providing feedback, you can email me feedback, set up a one-on-one with me. You can host MHP at your organization, your company, to hear from multiple staff who might be involved in the process. And then my intent is to have some type of advisory group go through that feedback and produce concrete recommendations, essentially design a program for Minnesota Housing so that this program can go into effect as early as possible in 2023. Because they don't have a staff member dedicated and they're hiring, we think that this is going to be really important. So if you are interested in providing feedback in any way that I've outlined, please email me at libby.murphy@mhp.org. And lastly, I want to thank all of our partners along the way, the legislators who endorse the program, our volunteers, our public policy advisory group, which use the tax credit as a basis for developing its criteria and its report. This was a fun process, and getting to travel all over the state and work with all of those endorsers that you saw in Senator Nelson's slides. So thank you so much. And as part of the follow-up, we will be sending you all the slides from today, an updated summary from MHP, a recording of this webinar, and any pertinent follow-up in terms of how you can engage with MHP as we develop recommendations for Minnesota housing. So thank you so much, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.